Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Woodstock, Interviews and Recollections, by Dale Bell. Read by Peter Berkrot and Exie Sands. Foreword. Martin Scorcese, on Woodstock. Woodstock obviously emerged from its historical moment. And one of the things about that moment was that everyone was waiting for a big defining event that would counteract all the awful things that had happened. There was the music. There was the idea of rejecting the rest of the world and living in a natural state. There was the drug culture. There was the political stance against the government, specifically its policy in Vietnam. And they all came together in this moment. It's interesting that people called it the Woodstock Nation, because that's what people wanted, to be separate, to have their own community. And for 3 days they had it. When I look back at the second half of the 60s, I realize it is the only time I have ever heard people talk about love in serious terms, as a force to combat greed, hate, and violence. What does it symbolize today? What will it symbolize for future generations? Well, what does the Paris Commune symbolize today? What do the New York draft riots symbolize today? They're events from a more distant past, but it's the same past that Woodstock is now receding into. What it symbolizes is that things can happen, incredible events that are the product of many particular elements converging at a particular moment. And those events can't be repeated. Look at Woodstock, too. But the fact that something new did happen on a grand scale, something that felt like nothing else that had ever happened before, means that something entirely new can happen again, in a way that we can't predict. Martin Scorcese. Introduction. Dale Bell, associate producer of the film Woodstock. It seems like yesterday. A group of long-haired freaks, clad in bell-bottom jeans and tattered hairbands, some sporting cowboy hats, invade the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank, California in the early winter of 1970. Tumbleweeds dance in the Santa Ana winds among the vacant sound stages. Tall grass forces its way through the empty tarmac. It looks like the day the earth stood still. Or is it Stanley Kramer's On the Beach? We say to each other, is this the Hollywood we've all dreamed of? Only a handful of security people greet us, wondering who we are. Where did we come from? What are we doing on their premises? And what, they demand, is that weird gear we're trucking onto their lot? What are editing tables? We know film, they say, a Western twang to our New York ears. Film editing machines always go up and down, not sideways. Ribbing each other at our expense, they tease, "Your long hair is going to get caught in the reels of film. Maybe you'd better wear hairnets." From their offices above and around us, Fred Weintraub, producer, John Calley, worldwide production chief, and Ted Ashley, chairman, must have been looking on bemused. Back in New York City, the chairman of Atlantic Records, Ahmet Ertegun, might have been smiling like the Cheshire Cat. The boss of all of them, silver-haired and tongued Steve Ross, might have been clapping his hands in glee. Not one of them knew then that our hippie movie, Woodstock, would pay their salaries, keep their children in school, allow them to take their vacations, and enrich their stockholders. Much less that it would finance the rebirth of the once mighty Warner Brothers, revolutionizing the music business at the same time. Nor did anyone know how our movie would affect the drug culture, the war in Vietnam, the civil rights struggles in the South, or the aftermath of Kent State. How many times since have writers, musicians, commentators, comedians, and politicians invoked the event they experienced only on film, in vain or in glory? A scant 4 months earlier, August 15th, 16th, and 17th, 1969, the jubilant days that now live for generations, 500,000 people had forged a pilgrimage to a tiny spot in New York State. We had trekked along with the largest, most highly sophisticated documentary film unit ever assembled to record it all. No precedent to guide our efforts. The presence of drugs was a certainty. The crowd could become uncontrollable. Pandemonium? Nirvana? Madness? Peace and love? Mayhem? As each performing group of musicians found their way to the front of the vast platform to face their daunting audience of loyal, peaceful fans, we filmmakers huddled on the lip of the stage, making plans. Film loads were calculated, camera positions assigned, songs from the set selected. Style was discussed. But we were fearful that our 15 cameramen would run out of precious film if the helicopters couldn't land with our mandatory cargo. We were entirely without financial means, just enough to purchase raw stock. Everything else was a house of cards built on promise and speculation and many gut feelings. As late as 2 weeks before the festival, in early August, no one was preparing to make the movie. Somehow we had assembled this massive crew and a complete kit of the best equipment available in the space of 6 days, without funding. And now here we were, in it. Bonded together by camaraderie and adrenaline, we fought off claustrophobia, fear, heat, hunger, and sleep. Working from plywood sawhorse tables underneath the massive stage, deprived of food and water, covered with mud and rain, risking electrocution in the windy thunderstorms of Saturday, virtually sleepless for 3 nights, we moved synchronously through our paces like an army. Runners assigned to each of the 6 onstage cameramen gathered like ball boys in tournament tennis, ready to leap forward when a cameraman needed help or a new roll of film. Loaders beneath the stage, their sweating arms immersed in black film changing bags, loaded and unloaded magazines tirelessly in ankle-deep mud, knowing that one scratch on the emulsion of one film roll could ruin a good day's or night's work. During daylight hours, when we could maneuver among the throng of 500,000 people, we tried to determine the kinds of stories we would be able to cover before nightfall, for everyone knew that the documentary sequences would be equally as important as the music. We were mindful to keep our eyes out for spontaneous situations, and to film what interested us, to turn off when we lost interest. Never before, and need I say never since, despite so many attempts at imitation, had such advanced technology been married so dynamically, so swiftly, so harmoniously, to a vision we filmmakers had developed independently in the tumultuous cauldron of the 60s. Over the course of a short but turbulent journey, we were thrown together, total strangers and lifelong friends, to pool our collective experiences, our skills, our wisdom, and our vision, to create for future generations a single revolutionary memoir. As none of us could truly assess its impact before the movie was released, we were unaware that we were creating a symbol for an age. But driven by the desire to get it right, we managed to record, live on film for posterity, the most successful documentary the world has ever known, an icon of this century, Woodstock. I always considered myself the least likely person to be at White Lake, New York, that August of 1969, because my head had always been saturated with Broadway melodies, interlaced with Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, and sometimes Chopin. There was no place for Baez, Butterfield, or what was that name? Sly and the Family Stone. I was busy raising my family, 3 small sons, Jonathan, David, and Andrew, with my wife Anne in a Victorian 3-story gingerbread house on the banks of the Hudson River, facing the vast Tappan Zee. Had we inherited the mantle of revolution from former owner Betty Friedan, whose The Feminine Mystique called for a changed role for women, and had been written in our bedroom only 6 years earlier? We had just returned from spending a year in Washington, where I was part of the press corps in public television. This assignment brought me in touch with President Johnson, cabinet members, and the likes of Ralph Nader. I counted myself a member of the establishment. I was by no means a long-hair, and I had a few friends who were. Most of them were more than a little intimidating to me. In 1965, I had hired Michael Wadley and John Binder, fresh out of NYU Film School, and had given them their first official jobs. They had long hair and iconoclastic minds, but because they were so good and so different in personality from other crews who were walking the halls of educational television in New York in 1965, they quickly received calls from other producers. Soon, Mike and John were working regularly, traveling the world, meeting other camera crews like themselves, picking up on new technologies. Natural light, cinema verite, affected by handheld cameras being designed in France and Germany. These new cameras could revolutionize traditional 35mm news gathering. So aware were Mike and John of the importance of harnessing these innovations in cameras, recorders, and post-production gear, that they visited engineers and factories in France, Switzerland, and Germany, and explored applications of the equipment to new concepts in filmmaking. They weren't alone. Others of us, pioneering in educational television, found ourselves more advanced than commercial networks in our urgency to marry live satellite broadcasts with energetically talking heads, each ready to dissect the latest State of the Union address, for example. Yet our burgeoning medium was still searching for a message. In 1966, adhering to the Aristotelian unities of time, place, and action, I devised a program that would be filmed within a 24-hour day by 13 cameramen located in 10 different spots between San Diego and London, as though it was live on film. On this project, I brought together Mike, by then Wads to my ding, and David Myers, the legendary cameraman from the Bay Area who would become our collective mentor. Yet Mike and John Binder remained close friends who brought their families and friends to our house on the river. Gradually, in the winter and spring of 1969, I found myself anticipating unemployment for the first time since I had been married. Mike and John invited me to work out of their offices on Upper Broadway until I could find something permanent. It was there that I came in contact with a whole new breed of long-haired, ingenious, funny, inventive, passionate, brilliant, and sometimes weird people who were to change my life completely. Among them was the very youthful Larry Johnson, almost an alter ego of Michael, whose spiritual sense of the powerful music of his generation might have surpassed even his technical ability to record it and deliver it purely to another medium. Our encounters were tentative at first, but suspicion quickly gave way to mutual respect and appreciation. There was no way to ignore those infectious minds, the sense of camaraderie, the philosophical dichotomy, the sluice of energy that coursed up and down Manhattan. After all, we were filmmakers, above and underground, destined to take on the world. By virtue of the extraordinary variety of our work, we were fast becoming the eyes and ears of the thinking, caring populace in the United States and abroad. Our portable cameras had catapulted us to the front lines. Our responsibility was to tell it like it was, and so we were uniquely poised to leap into action when the festival happened. From the moment the film opened in March 1970, a scant 8 months after the incredible experience on Max Yasgur's farm, I knew that someday, somehow, our story had to be told. Soon after I returned home on the Hudson River, I was deluged with requests to talk about my experiences. So as not to forget too much, I took some elaborate notes, gave several talks to students, and recorded the lectures so that at least my family and I would have them for posterity. Even today, when people discover that I helped to make this movie, I'm asked, what was it like? My experience was just one of many. I cannot pretend to know how it affected those who were friends first, employees second, and extended family forever. Far be it from me to try to verbalize or homogenize their experiences, nor should I. Far better for me to ask them to talk for themselves. It was on this supposition that I asked them all to help in the production of this reunion on paper. Each of the 80-some people we brought to the site has a story to tell. How they got there, what they expected, what they encountered, how it affected them. Couple those on site with dozens more people in editing rooms that stretch from New York to Hollywood, and the extended family expands logarithmically. We would work together, eat together, marry and live together, and finally, we would grow into maturity, which is exactly where you find all of us right now, talking about our children and grandchildren. We've had reunions, gathering together with our families on the anniversary days in mid-August. How many other film crews in the history of the cinema have kept in touch for 30 years? But this reunion is different. It permits us to tell our stories as filmmakers, not the story of the festival itself, which has already been analyzed and spun to have fared thee well. What I have assembled through this effort are recollections which may have remained private to them for all these years. Some were there at the very beginning, before there was even a mention of a Woodstock festival, before the KEM, or the Keller as it was first called, was invented, before Merv Griffin assumed an unwitting role as godfather of the multiple screen concept, which later led to our ability to create a kaleidoscopic movie. Some joined the production after the event, still others were added during the final days of post-production. Most of us were unaware of the attempts by other filmmakers to secure the rights to film the festival. My recent conversations with Ahmet Erdogan, chairman and founder of Atlantic Records, and with Porter Bibb, then working as a producer on behalf of Al and David Maysles, have yielded very curious results, told here for the first time. All of us seem to be like ships passing in the night, unaware of the other's activities until now. Unraveling our little history still holds a great deal of fascination. I wrote the following letter to our extended family in June 1998. I need your help. I see this as a chance to preserve our story, how each of us contributed individually to the collective whole. Since the initial release of the movie and the accompanying magazine articles, this is the first opportunity I know of where those of us who made the film can actually tell our own stories, and right some wrongs in the process. To me, that is an important distinction, one which should make this book interesting to a film audience, as well as to listeners more interested in our imprint on the world's culture. I have always been impressed with the impact Woodstock has had on the fabric of America, but it has not, in my opinion, been limited to a sociological blot. Rather, I believe we affected how a generation was perceived, how music was written, recorded, marketed, and how it gave birth to the music industry we know today. How electronic and digital innovations developed from our extraordinary marriage of vision and new technology. How the production of sound for movies, including Dolby, THX, and Surround, evolved through techniques we invented. How non-linear editing grew from our use of multiple image KEMs. How performers were billed, marketed, and sent around the world on tours which had no precedent prior to our movie. How movie marketing to young people was transformed once we had drawn a new audience into the movie theaters. How our movie gave birth to MTV, Saturday Night Live, or how the establishment embraced and co-opted our revolutionary images, in spite of our efforts to deny them access. And basically, how we longhairs managed to astound the world with an historic icon, born in synchronicity. Nothing could have been accomplished had it not been for this totally unique synthesis. You may have had your own views of these manifestations. I want to try to get them out of you. Witnessing the remixing of the director's cut just 5 years ago reassured me that, together, we have created a monument to film history which remains as fresh and dynamic today as when it was first released almost 30 years ago. These are our stories, mingled with perceptions from some of the performers, and others whose work contributed to the success of the movie. In keeping with the tenor of our original times, I think of this project as a cinema verite book. To mirror the movie itself, this is also a multiple-image book. As a bookmaker, then, I have tried to minimize my intrusion into the content of others, as though I were a filmmaker, allowing objectivity and individual storytelling to emerge. As a result of this Rashomon experiment, you may be hearing sections of our history through different ears, thus some repetition may be evident. I hope you can tolerate an occasional overlap. Think of it as a double exposure or a long dissolve. You may also perceive some instant replay, slow-mo, and stop-motion animation. Allow your memory to collect this accumulated experience, a piece and a personality at a time. The truth about this movie, which almost didn't get made, emerges. By pulling all of our collective experiences together, I hope that those of us who may have caused pain to others in the odyssey of making this film will be shown compassion and forgiveness. It's not an excuse to be lured by a mysterious siren, but we were alive in extraordinarily tumultuous times, with a responsibility as documentarians to record them. We might have thought we were exempt from normal society, the untouchables. Maybe we had to believe we were in order to succeed at our craft. But it was an illusion that would haunt some of us the rest of our lives. Dale Bell, Grandview-on-Hudson, New York, and Mission Hills, California. Merv Griffin, The Freeing of America. We refer to Merv Griffin as the godfather of Woodstock, for his innovative assignments to the Wadley film team provided them an experimental laboratory for new cinematic technique. Merv, what can I tell you about Woodstock? Dale, tell me what you remember. Merv, is Michael Wadley still alive? Dale, very much so, and in New Hampshire, and sends his best. Merv, oh my God, give him my love. Dale, I will. Merv, he was such a different kind of guy, for a photographer at that time. A film photographer. He was very kind of aesthetic, almost fragile, but you realized there was a genius there behind that camera. Dale, you're absolutely right. Merv, I think the first thing Michael did, when we flew together in that DC-3 airplane I chartered out of New Jersey, that was to I did Sidewalks of New York, Sidewalks of New England, a Thanksgiving Day show with the kids at my farm. Is that all I did on the sidewalk things? Dale, in Providence you did Aretha Franklin's concert. Merv, yes, and then we did that baggage sequence with Paul Revere and the Raiders at the Boston airport. And I did a couple of songs. We were using the turning of the leaves in New England as background because it was so spectacular and so colorful. Dale, what do you remember about this merry gang of filmmakers? Merv, there was some innovation they had in shooting. It was very cinema verite. I mean, Michael was afraid of nothing camera-wise. He wasn't locked into the moves of the day. In other words, he was very adventuresome behind that camera. I remember we did Quiet Nights on a rocky beach where I was walking the rocks, in a kind of cold weather outfit doing Quiet Nights and the Quiet Stars, which had been pre-recorded by the orchestra, and I was singing it live. He was the most awesome photographer. Dale, well, he was. Unfortunately, he stopped doing it, the damned fool. Merv, has he stopped? Dale, yeah. He's writing and he's producing CD-ROMs and he's written screenplays, but he has not been a cinematographer virtually since Woodstock. No, in 1975 we did something together. Merv, I just recall the time I think he mortgaged his house, his family, his wife's ballet shoes, everything to do Woodstock. Dale, what did you think about the movie? Merv, it was fabulous. There has never been a gathering like that. Oh, there have been gatherings, but not with that spirit. I mean, it was the first. To have a memory like that recorded of the first of anything is wonderful. Dale, what impact did it have? Merv, it was tremendous. And of course, that was the decade every institution broke down. It was the freeing of America, good or bad. It just took away the reins that were on everybody and the framework that was around everything you did. My show is a great platform for all the people who protested everything. The show was on nighttime in New York and other major cities, Metromedia. Jane Fonda couldn't get on any television show except mine. And the reason she could get on mine was because we were syndicated, so there was nobody who could say, Merv, you can't have her on. but she was persona non grata on the networks, as was Muhammad Ali. He was not allowed on. All the civil protests came on my show, the mailers, and on the other hand, we gave equal time to the Buckleys and everybody else. But my platform was the source of speaking out in America, and they couldn't stop me. I had on the first protest against, by a world-famous person, against the Vietnam War, Lord Bertrand Russell, who later ran the Vietnam War crimes trial in Sweden. Bob Considine, who was the front-page writer of the then Journal American of New York, wrote that Merv Griffin should be taken off the air for what he's done. And his son was my cameraman, Barry, on the show. And he wrote this piece, and I answered him. He said, "We're in wartime, and Merv Griffin puts on a protest against America." And I said, "We're not in wartime. What are you talking about? It's a police action. No war has been declared." Dale, how do you feel about that today, Merv Griffin? Merv, I feel good about it. It was a contribution. I was the only one ever allowed to go to Alcatraz to tape the Indians, which I did, when they took over Alcatraz. My philosophy of the show is that there were many voices speaking in America. Not all of them do you agree with, but you should hear them. They should have some place to speak. Of course, it was misused, too. The New York Daily News would run out and cover what they called a major protest, and there would be 4 wackos standing on a corner with some signs, but they would build it up like it was something. And then one night, a whole black organization took over my show. They rose up out of the audience. They contacted every pressman in New York and told them it was going to happen, but they didn't tell me, with these high African whistles. But they picked the wrong show. It was during the Vietnam War, and I stopped. I let the cameras go. And I said, "Okay, who's your spokesman, and now what are you protesting?" And they said there weren't enough black jazz musicians in my orchestra. And I said, "There are 4. What are you talking about? It's a quarter of the orchestra," I said. "You picked the wrong place and the wrong cause. Do you know what's going on in the world?" So that kind of made their thing poop out. Michael, he was a part of that, too. He photographed the happening of the youth and their music. Dale, every one of us was doing this in New York City in the 60s. Merv, my God, well, all of it was happening on my show. Remember the famous one that made the front pages? When the kid, Abby Hoffman, from the Chicago 7 came on my show, and he was wearing what CBS said. By that time I left syndication and had been on CBS 2 years. He was wearing the American flag. They said you cannot wear a flag as a piece of clothing. And so they prodded him out of the show with an electric prod and just left me talking to a black screen. And then, when I did the commercial, Roy Rogers and Dale Evans came up in the same shirts for Ford Motor Company. Bob Woods from CBS almost had a heart attack. Michael Wadley, Triumph of the Will. Interview with Michael Wadley, director of Woodstock, on the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank, California, spring 1994, while completing the remixing of the soundtrack and adding some 40 minutes to the original length of 3 hours, 4 minutes for the definitive version, the director's cut. Dale, did you have any idea back then that it was going to be anything more than a concert? That it would be this big thing we call Woodstock and have a different connotation? Michael, absolutely. I mean, you gotta remember that Woodstock started out as a village that was famous as a radical gathering place. That in 1919, in the village of Woodstock, the American Communist Party was started. In the 1920s, all sorts of radicals came up there, socialists and everything else. In the 50s, Allen Ginsberg went there. In the 60s, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, everybody else. So we really had a sense that we were a continuation of the traditions of that village in making the festival. So we thought we were onto something big. And then, of course, when we got that beautiful farm from Max Yasgur with pastures and lake and bird stands and everything, we thought, well, this is a place where people are going to want to come. And sure enough, 500,000 people got there, and 3 million tried to get there. That's what the cops said on the roads. Dale, at the time, though, were you so busy working that you couldn't absorb this, or was it pretty clear right as it was happening? Michael, I think it was pretty clear right as it was happening, because 500,000 people you don't overlook. And then also, as a kind of barometer, when we saw the New York Times...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?